Yeah, so my name's Bernie White. I am a customer engineer from Microsoft, based out of Brisbane. And I've been with Microsoft for a bit over 5 years, and really excited to talk DevOps, automation, and Azure.
That's amazing. Yeah, we are all here at the Azure Task channel again, back. Glauco is a regular on the Portuguese talks. Now his first one in English. Welcome. And Sudi, and we're going to record. Sudi, is that the right way to say your name?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And then you're going to be recording next week with her, and then she's following us to see how we do it. And that's nice to have everyone here. Tao was the one that started that conversation for us to have this meeting. Tao wrote a blog. Say something, Tao. Explain that. Welcome, everyone.
I recently I've been working with Bernie for the last couple of months, I think, trying to implement PSRule in the pipelines we're developing right now in a customer's environment, and Bernie has been helping me to get it configured. So I wrote a blog post a few days ago about how to use PSRule and gave an example on how to do that in Azure pipeline. So I thought, it's good to have Bernie in this channel and have talk about PSRule, because I think it's an awesome tool. It deserves more publicity than So
that sounds good. Sounds good. Sounds good for you, Sudi and Glauco. Something that you want to learn.
Yeah, great.
That's good. Someone want to share? It'd be nice if you can open the blog as well, or Benny, if you have the blog open there. I think he's on the chat that we talked before. How do you want to get started? Share your screen and show for us your open source project that started all this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go for it.
So pretty well, PSRule, it's an open source project just on GitHub, like a lot of the Microsoft content these days. So you can pretty well find it there under the Azure organization. And so it's really trying to focus on a few different things, right? So I guess really the vision and where this sort of tool came about was to actually go and work through some of our documentation, right? So when you sort of look at our documentation about Azure, then one of the things that we have is the well-architected framework. And the well-architected framework has a couple of different pillars in it, and one of those pillars, obviously all of them being quite important, but one of them, operational excellence, goes through and talks through if we were to treat infrastructure code as application code, then maybe we should do some things like unit testing or testing against that code, just like we would do application code. And really that's, I guess, where PSRule for Azure really tries to focus in, is it tries to provide a tool set for people to start using that's open source, that then they can basically start to build out that quickly in their own environment. When I first envisaged the tool, I sort of spoke to a lot of different people and a lot of customers, and they were sort of saying, it's great if you, show me these pester tests that we can write. And, we've done some PowerShell before, but really what we want is something that we can implement really quickly. And we don't necessarily have the time to go ahead and build, a few hundred tests to actually get it like that, right? And if you sort of think further, within Azure, when an Azure resource lands in Azure, we have things like Azure Policy and Microsoft Defender for Cloud. But then if we sort of look and move further to the left, back in our CI/CD tools, such as Azure DevOps or GitHub or whatever tool you choose, and then back even further into Visual Studio Code, then when we're sort of building that code, we don't actually have like a tool that then sort of helps out in that early part of the life cycle. And we know with DevOps that obviously the sooner we can adopt any sort of changes in the pipeline, then this allows us to reduce cost and make a more effective platform as a result. So that's pretty well where PSRule for Azure comes in. So really designed to increase success, provide meaningful guidance. So instead of obviously just looking at the well-architected framework as a set of documentation, it actually goes and gives you specific cases for, well, you said you wanted to deploy this Azure storage account. Here are the things that maybe you could change with that. And here's the guidance, and here's the links to obviously the official documentation, which then gives you all the background details. But if you just want to change this bit of code, this is how you do it. So that's sort of like the idea. And then obviously, again, plugging into that DevOps lifecycle, obviously we can integrate things like peer review and break the build so that prevents it going to production if it's not in that right format, right, or in the right configuration. So pretty well what PSRule for Azure provides is now over 270 pre-built rules. So again, customers can absolutely go ahead and build their own rules, and many of them might want to do that, such as things like tagging standards, which obviously is often more customer specific and environment specific. But then all those things that are a lot more generic, like, hey, I'd like to ensure that we use TLS 1.2, then we can go ahead and enforce that straight as far down as in VS Code. In terms of tooling, so there's a couple of different places where we tool, and we have native tooling. It is a PowerShell module at its core, so technically you can go ahead and run it on Jenkins. You can go ahead and run it on different platforms that aren't one of our, I guess, core platforms that we support, but there is some native tooling as well to make it easier. So that basically for PSRule for Azure is basically GitHub Actions, Azure Pipelines with Azure DevOps, and VS Code. So that's really where it's targeted, and that's where the native extensions are. And then there's obviously a process to build your own rules and create your own baselines, again, different rule sets that then sort of makes it nice and easy to use from an enterprise perspective as well. Cool. So that's us on GitHub. We'll jump across to a demo, but I guess, do you have any thoughts before we do that?
I was trying to, I really like that, but I was trying to compare with Terraform and see how people do that today on Terraform. That was my question. I know there are some frameworks for Terraform where people also do like checks in the Terraform Enterprise, but they say if someone's using Terraform, how they associate that feature.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, Terraform is a tool. Obviously, from an Azure native perspective, we look at ARM templates and Bicep code, and some customers may choose to use Terraform, and that's fantastic. In terms of pre-built rules for Terraform, I'm not necessarily aware of any. There may be out there though. Definitely in terms of if you want to do this within the CI pipeline, then something like Terraform Enterprise or HashiCorp, the HashiCorp suite will help you do that, as you know, George. But in terms of native Azure capability, then ARM templates and Bicep is supported. It's pretty well the same rules across both, and you can actually run PSRule across Terraform. But because we don't look at the code directly, at least currently, then we can actually do it after it's deployed into Azure. So it still helps out, because obviously it gives you parity between the two cases, but you have to deploy it to a dev subscription first before you can extract all the goodness from it.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, if someone is using Terraform Enterprise where they have some rules there, you probably can have the same rules here. And if they want to move away from Terraform Enterprise and use Bicep, for example, they can have similar rules. That's my first view.
Yeah.
And Sounds good. Anyone else want to ask something? Tao?
I thought that in Terraform you have like Sentinel, right? We've used before in other
Exactly.
but then you have to write your own rule. I think that the best selling point for PSRule is that those pre-configured like 270 rules are already pre-configured, ready for you to consume. You just imagine how much time it's going to save you if you have to develop them all by yourself.
Yeah, and Sentinel on Terraform, there's also like a kind of a library on GitHub, that HashiCorp kind of maintain, but it's not that organized like you have here, and I don't think it's like 270 rules. And then there are, on Azure, they don't have too many rules for Sentinel like you have here. I think it's a big, improve. And many people, that's the reason many people not using, even if they have Terraform Enterprise, they're not using Sentinel, to apply those rules.
Is that free or you have to pay for that?
I think if you have Terraform Enterprise, probably is there.
Well, Terraform Enterprise is not free.
Yeah, no, Terraform Enterprise is not free. That's another point. But there are customers that they have it, they pay for Terraform Enterprise, but they're not using the whole product. Like they could be using rules, and what means that there are many people, a lot of people using Bicep that they're not using rules as well, and now they have here for free.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing I like is although I haven't played myself, I think it's a very attractive feature that I want to try is the Azure Monitor integration. So, once you can ingest alerts like logs into Log Analytics, then you'll be able to raise alerts if something is misconfigured.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Let's see. I want to see that running. Glauco and Sudi, you want to ask something?
Yeah. So I've got a repo here. So where I got this repo was we actually have a quick start repo as well. So it's just a GitHub template. So you can pretty well go ahead and use this template. And so at the moment, this template repo is mostly wired up for GitHub and GitHub Actions. But Azure pipelines will be coming in the future. So I've pretty well gone and used this template, basically forked it through that template process to my own personal organization. And then I've basically just cloned that down. And so that I have that in VS Code. And so what I get with this is a few fold. Obviously, I've got some basic, Docker and stuff like that. But the main thing that I get is 2 folders, one for Bicep and one for templates. So again, just sort of showing you that you can use across both. We're mostly going to focus on the Bicep one, of course, but I guess just know that whatever you build or PSRule, it works across both. So you pretty well write the rules once. So in terms of Bicep, I've got a few things here. I've got a Bicep module. So I've got my Key Vault module, and I've got a storage account. Again, pretty common resources that we typically deploy a lot on Azure for pretty well each type of application that we deploy. And so within here, I've got some, basic Bicep resources to deploy my storage account. I've got, a few different properties here, some services, and things like that. I've also got within my Key Vault, again, I've got a few different parameters here available, quite a few more in terms of things like soft delete and RBAC and various different things there. And then so over here in my deployments folder, I've basically just got a Bicep file, which is basically going and calling basically those Bicep modules. Now, this could be those Bicep modules could be hosted on a private registry through Azure Container Registry. In this case, they're just in the repo, obviously, because they're just cloned from GitHub, but you could absolutely do that and it works fine in that scenario. So effectively, I'm going and just basically referencing my modules. I'm passing in a few parameters. This particular quick start repo has some hints as what you can do to get some failures fairly quickly. So if you're interested in trying it yourself, then feel free to check that repo out. But so in example here, we've got our storage location. We might want to go ahead and choose a different location, maybe an Azure location that doesn't exist, which could also just be through a typo, right? So maybe we actually just did East US, right? Obviously, if we try to deploy this to Azure, this is going to be a problem. So we might want to know earlier rather than later that that's going to be a problem. We might also want to obviously get knowledge of things like, okay, well, for public blob access, which can, if it's enabled, then it allows the potential for anonymous access to blob storage, assuming it's been set up that way. So typically we would go ahead and sort of make sure that this is false and off, but let's sort of see what happens, what PSRule picks it up if we set to true. And then just to sort of show you there's no smoke and mirrors or anything like that occurring, if we just go ahead and control click through to that storage, let's go ahead and see where it's wired up. So for this here, for my location parameter, it's just a normal location parameter. I do have a bit of additional metadata here, which actually tells it that it is a location, which then helps PSRule understand that, hey, I should only allow Azure locations that are actually really Azure locations. And I have this allow blob public access, which again is just a parameter which is set down here, right? And so you could sort of see here, there's obviously a few different ways. If we just look at a file, and this is what a challenge with things like with Pester and other I guess testing approaches is just looking at a file. You could actually have parameters, and parameters could be set to different values. So you need to actually really have the full context of, once you've actually go to deploy it, what would actually be the result, as opposed to what the default in the file is, which might be completely different, right? And we can, let's just for argument's sake as well, we're just going to do a hard-coded change here as well into that file as well, right? So let's just save both of those files. And so I will commit this to my like repository in a sec, and we'll sort of see how that looks in GitHub as well. But let's just run it locally. So within VS Code, I have an extension for PSRule. So I've got a PSRule, the preview extension installed, although there's another one as well that you can use. So I've got that installed, and one of the things that gives me is it gives me a task. So if I go run and then or terminal run task, then it will come up with PSRule here, and this will allow me to run PSRule within VS Code very conveniently. To do this, there was an additional step that I did, which was install the PowerShell module. So I've done that, but let's just go ahead and run this task and see what happens. Cool, and in fairly short succession, we should sort of see a few different errors appear here, right? So let's just let that happen. Any questions or thoughts from the panel while we go through this?
I just want to add that you can run this in the PowerShell by invoking the PowerShell commands directly as well, outside of the VS Code, right?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And so I guess one of the things that we sort of took feedback from people was, you know, PowerShell is awesome and great, but a lot of customers aren't comfortable running PowerShell. So we wanted to make sure that the experience, well, you absolutely can run in PowerShell, and if you're a PowerShell guru, then you can absolutely go nuts there, but you don't have to. So again, that's, I guess, the reason for some of the tooling, which means that you don't really even need to know too much about PowerShell or even touch PowerShell. It pretty well does it for you, right? And you can sort of see here, we've got a few errors, right? So our min TLS, of course, is wrong, right? It's sort of saying, hey, you know, this is a problem, right? This field is set to this. Would you like to go ahead and see some documentation about how you can correct that, right? So if we go ahead and control click there, it's going to open up the documentation. So the PSRule documentation, it's going to give you some information about obviously why we're doing that. and why that's a good practice. And then we're sort of going to talk through an example. You can sort of see here we've got an ARM template example, and then further down we've got a bicep example. Again, sort of giving people an idea of what they need to set, right? Because you may not have wrote that code and you may not have made that change, right? So it's important that you sort of know how do we actually correct it. And then obviously would link out to obviously the relevant Microsoft Docs and the well-architected framework. So again, if you want to know more about that, you can obviously explore it further. Some of the other things that we have here is our public access. So again, we set this via a second file. So we set it through the deployment as opposed to the main module. And again, sort of saying, again, sort of calling out what the problem is, right? The reason why the rule failed. So our allowed blob public access was set to true. And again, more linked to documentation with similar sort of stuff. Similar down here, because I think I've got 2 storage accounts, I think, deployed. So that's the reason why I've got 2 instances of that. But basically that's the same rule, right? And that's the idea, right? That we should be able to basically get that information out, right? Cool. So if we go ahead and now put this into a branch. So let's just make sure we've got the latest files.
Benny, just a quick question before I go ahead. What's the magic? How that works?
Yeah, good question. So within PSRule, there is a number of like pre-built rules, like we're sort of saying. So if we go to the repo, I can show you pretty well how that works. So there is a little bit of additional magic. So I guess the key challenge that we need to solve to sort of make this something that, again, sort of really adds a lot of value is we needed to get to the process of, instead of just looking at the file, we need to resolve, the parameters and all the functions. If you've got conditions and you've got something turned on or off, and obviously that makes a difference, right? Because it matters when it actually hits Azure, what's actually going to happen. So that was, I guess, a key challenge that we needed to resolve. So effectively what we did was we implemented the functions that, just like a normal ARM template, and basically we have a way to basically do that locally within your environment, right? So we basically would go ahead and match up all the parameters, all the variables, resolve all the functions, all the conditions, all the copy loops that you might have within your various different Azure resources. And we basically present out to PSRule before it does the validation. Here are all the resources that would be deployed in this particular configuration, right? And then we go ahead and then run it through a set of rules. And so each rule, which again is just, it's all nice public source, so you can go ahead and check it out for yourself. Each rule could be implemented in one of 3 choices. You can implement it in YAML. So there'd be an example, like if we go to our storage rule, we might be able to find that specific one. So storage in our YAML file, there is a rule here that basically, it actually looks very similar to like a Kubernetes manifest. Because it's similar in nature. It's in YAML, and basically we can define that rule itself. In this case here, this is for something slightly different, but this is for checking to make sure that then the network ACLs are set to deny. But that's one option. So you can write your rules in YAML. And we find that often people like to pick this one up fairly quickly because it's easy to get started, and there's good support within VS Code for it. The second option is we can also write in JSON. So again, if you love JSON, then we've got an option there for you. And then the last option is you can also go ahead and write your rules in PowerShell. So the PowerShell rules look like that. They have some like accelerator keywords and things like that that are documented to, again, make it minimalistic. Again, we don't necessarily want to, have too much burden when we go ahead and do this. And effectively what happens, or the magic behind it, is it will go ahead and look at the resource after it does that resolution and then match it to the type. It can also then go ahead and run additional conditional functions to determine, should it actually go ahead and run this rule in the first place for that particular resource. And then if it decides, yes, that this rule is applicable for this resource, then it will basically go ahead and run the condition. So our specific case was one of these, which was allow public access. So you can sort of see there, that's basically what happened on the back end. It basically went and checked to see whether the allow blob public access was set to false. And if it wasn't, then it basically generated an error. So again, you can actually just use normal PowerShell in there as well. So I guess don't feel like you absolutely have to use the PSRule keywords here. Apart from rule, that's the really only required one, because that's used to define the block. But outside of that, you can actually just use normal PowerShell, but there are some accelerators that are built in.
I got a question here.
Yeah.
Have you seen any situations where like the property name changes between the API versions of the resource?
So not for this specific case, but yeah, if they do, then you can actually do like any of type conditions,
right.
Which then allows you to sort of say, if it's this, then this, or if it's this, then do this. So that would be the scenario that you could do that. But okay. Yeah, you can absolutely do that. I haven't seen specifically that, but that is an option. Right.
Because I not while I'm using this tool, but in the past I did see, like when I was writing policies, that the alias changes because of the the API.
Now I have a question for Tao, Benny. Tao, when you use that, how you manage the set? You have like 270 rules at the moment. You always apply the 270, or you maybe remove some, maybe you create like the new ones. How you did to manage that?
I think
Benny is the creator. Let's see from the user now.
There's a baseline, right? The baseline, one of the pages show like there's several baselines. There's like a preview, like default baseline. There's a So you basically specify the name here, right? And then if any rules you wanna exclude, you can define that in a PSRule YAML file to exclude. And in fact, I did exclude some. There's one called the parameters must have descriptions or something like that. I excluded it. So you can turn off, say, exclude certain rules. Am I right, Bernie?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's 100% right. And so I guess early on, when we sort of started to have more and more people using it, it's sort of we were aware that as time went on, to make this enterprise ready, then what we need to do is often enterprises can't adopt as fast as PSRule, right? So PSRule generally releases rules each month. Often enterprises can't move that fast, right? And these may be best practices that they've already implemented. It's not necessarily saying that there's new best practices, but more the rules within PSRule have been added to address those, recommendations as far as the well-architected framework is concerned. So if they can't adopt them that quickly, how does it leave enterprises? And so I guess our solution to that was, let's build some baselines. And so we released quarterly baselines. We're actually just due for the March one soon in the latest release. But basically, these quarterly baselines have a fixed rule set. So pretty well the idea is that you can absolutely just go ahead and adopt all rules. And then as new rules come out each month, you can get those too. But in the case of an enterprise, they'll probably actually want to go ahead and just pin themselves to a baseline. So pick a baseline that makes sense, pin yourself to that. Then when the next baseline gets released, you don't have to adopt it straight away. If you want to, you absolutely can. But otherwise, you'll stay on that baseline until you're ready to move, right? And you will get a warning within the tooling that basically says you're using an outdated baseline now. And so you know that there's a new baseline there, but you don't have to move until you're ready. So that's really the idea here. You can sort of see here as well, we run it for a little while, and we've got a quarterly baseline each time. Also, by default, you only get rules for basically generally available Azure features. So we put the preview Azure features, because often they change a bit, and often, sometimes the best practices aren't fully, evolved at that point. So we put those in basically a separate set of baselines. So if you want to get basically rules for preview Azure features, then you can also get those as well. But again, you don't get those by default unless you opt into that, right? Cool.
That sounds good. I mean, the baseline will be like a group of rules.
Yeah.
Then there'll be like your recommendation. Then it'll be, the baselines. And how you add like a customization. Are those rules included on your binary, probably on the binary of the PSRule when you update? And
yeah,
how you create like a custom rule and where the code of the custom rule, how that rule is loaded on the latest version of the the PSRule.
Yeah, good question, George. So we have documentation around this, but I'll sort of show you how that works. But so in terms of if you would like to go ahead and do customization, there's some examples there, for enforcing custom tags and, enforcing code ownership as well. So there's some examples there that you can sort of go ahead and have a look at. Also, within that quick start repo, there's actually a PSRule folder, which then also includes some sample custom rules, which you can get started with. But let's have a look at that now. So if we go ahead and look in that PSRule folder, you can sort of see there's sort of two files. Each file, so I guess from a naming convention point of view, it needs to end in .rule, .ps1 or .yaml or .json. But basically, PSRule will automatically detect these files by default. So you can put the rules in a different folder, but by default, it will pick them up from the .ps-rule folder in the root of your repository. And so examples of that, so again, sort of tagging is a pretty common ask for customers that's fairly custom to customers. So this would be an example of a rule that then would go ahead and look at specific tag values. Maybe if we wanted to go ahead and sort of set another requirement somewhere here. So maybe if we have a look at one of these things and we sort of say, okay, we want to make sure that we only use hot storage accounts, right? So access tier storage accounts. So let's go ahead and do that. So if we wanted to go ahead and write a rule, we could actually go ahead and do and use some of the snippets. So we can do a rule with type. We can then go ahead and sort of say this is our org specific rule that is Azure related and related to hot storage, right? We can then go ahead and give it a synopsis. So a synopsis is sort of like a quick way to give the information in the recommendation in the output. You can actually go ahead and build Markdown just like we did with those other like documentation site. So it actually comes from Markdown. So you can do that too, but you don't have to sort of do things quickly within your organization. So synopsis allows you to do a quick, basically quick reason for that. So if we go ahead and sort of say something along the lines of, our org requires hot storage only, see policy, poll 001, right? Some sort of organizational policy, and we could put a link in there as well if we'd like. Now let's go ahead and choose the type. So we're going to choose the type of the storage account, which I have conveniently there. And now we're going to go ahead and create a condition. So to basically check that case. So again, there is a number of pre-built snippets that we can use. But if we go ahead and just type that out now, really what we want to do is go ahead and check to see whether this access tier is hot and it's under the properties property. So if we go ahead and use the field keyword, then we can go ahead and do properties dot, I forget what it was. Let's go ahead and copy and paste that one. Access tier basically needs to be equal to hot. So if we go equals hot, And that's not case sensitive by default. You can actually turn on case sensitivity by basically choosing an additional option there with case sensitivity. But by default, it's not, so it doesn't really matter too much. So if we go ahead now and change our code to be, I guess, not in line with what our organization wants, right? And go, cool, save that. Again, we can go ahead and rerun our rule. And hopefully, we should actually have pretty well an additional error that we didn't have before.
Then, just to explain, Betty, PSRule is going to have all those 370 rules on the baseline that you chose, plus the ones inside that .psrule folder that's going to be loaded on demand. And then now you have an extension.
Absolutely.
There.
That's how it works, right? And so you can see that one there, right? Exactly what we wrote. Obviously, we don't have a link to that, but we could obviously go ahead and add Markdown documentation with a link out somewhere if we like. But then that's sort of what's gonna be happening before. And you can sort of see the reason again is because it's set to cool, right? And you know, we require hot storage.
I got a question, and this is question actually for myself. I couldn't figure it out. Well, you might have told me before, but I can't find how to do it. So you build your own rules in the .psrule folder in the YAML file, but then you specify in the pipeline. You can specify which one you want to load, right? The name from the metadata field in that YAML file. But then, how do you pick what the out-of-the-box baseline do you run on top of your custom rules in there?
Yeah. So for picking your baseline, there's a couple of different ways to do it. It is there is no tooling within VS Code natively to do it right at the moment, but there is in the GitHub Action pipeline. So within the GitHub Action pipeline, if we go to the workflows and we go to my pipeline that basically checks against that baseline. As a quick side, there's actually also a GitHub snippet in there that you can just add as well. But if we sort of go here, there's actually a property on here, which is actually called baseline. And we can actually go ahead and set the baseline just on that action itself. Similar under Azure DevOps or Azure Pipelines.
So this baseline, do you specify, can you only specify one baseline or multiple in here?
You can only specify one baseline.
So which one do I specify here? The one that you wrote yourself, or the other one? So
we just wrote a rule. We didn't write a baseline. A baseline is more of a collection of rules. So so if we wanted to choose our specific baseline, then we could go ahead and choose like this one here, right? Basically copy that name, throw that in over here. And then so an additional option that you'd probably want to do with that is in the PSRule.yaml, which is a configuration file. As we sort of said, that allows you to do things like exclude rules or suppression. So you may want to create like exceptions, like we want to enforce hot storage for all storage accounts except for this one, right? And so we handle that through suppression, where we basically sort of say, for this resource, based on its name, then exclude this rule, right? But in terms of, and again, most of this comes from that quick start repo. If we wanted to then go ahead and then include additional rules when we're running a baseline, normally what would happen is if we have additional rules, it would automatically exclude additional rules because we're only running what's in the baseline. But there's actually an option under our include, I think, from memory, or actually you're testing me here. So give me a sec, but maybe I'll actually have to check the documentation. There you go. If we go to the docs, and then we go to reference, and we go ahead and look at options, there's quite a lot of options there, and one of them allows us to include rules outside the repo. So logging, include module. I think we've actually already got it. So include local, yeah. So this is to do with inside the baseline itself.
Yeah.
We basically go ahead and include this. And so what it will do is it won't include other rules within the baseline, but it will include any rules that are in the repo, right? So again, making sure that you can still combine those rule sets, which is obviously the idea. So yeah, that's basically the rules, the setting that you use.
So my next question is, often we have like multiple pipelines in a repo. So if you want to set exclusions, like the rules to exclude, how do I do that? Like, if I have different requirements for different pipelines in the same repo.
Yeah, so I mean, the easiest way to do that for the most part is actually to go ahead and use a baseline, right? Because again, baselines are sort of designed for that. You can also go ahead and set it with options and also environment variables as well, which is sometimes a requirement. But the easiest way is actually to go ahead and create your own custom baseline. So again, you can actually go ahead and create a baseline in that same rule file. Again, there's a snippet for baselines, right? And then we can give it a name, such as org baseline, right? Baseline. And then within this here, there's a few additional properties. One of them is called rule, which then allows you to specify, well, what rules would I include? And as a result of that, there is an include, which then allows you to include rules by their name. There's also an exclude option to exclude or to remove things from the baseline, and there's also a tags option as well. So you may have noticed in some cases when we're looking back in our repo over here, these rules have different tags on them, so we can actually use those tags to select the rules. So we can do, typically speaking, we might go ahead and include and then do some tags and basically bundle that together and maybe exclude a few that have the right tags but we don't want to include. You can also, similar for our rules locally, you can also go ahead and add tags to them. And so the way you would do that for here would actually go ahead and do metadata, and then on metadata there is tags, right? And then we can actually go ahead and set up our own tags too. So that's, I guess, a couple of ways that you can set up different rule sets. Yeah.
That's a good question, Tal. Maybe if you allow Benny to, when you execute the, when you run the validation, you select what's the configuration file that you want to use.
Yeah.
Probably that's very easy to implement. Yeah, at the moment it's just one file, but you could just overwrite it and have multiple configuration files where you just select one. That's probably very easy to implement in a feature if you want. If you think that's going to help. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a good point. So at the moment through GitHub Actions and Azure pipelines, you can't choose the configuration file per se. You can choose the path that you start from. So it will look in the current working path. So wherever you start from, you could have a lower level structure with 2 different PSRule files, and you could move to one of those subdirectories and execute from there. So that's entirely possible, in which case then you'd have 2 different configuration files.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's an option. From the command line, you can have that behavior. So if you use assert PSRule, there's actually an option parameter, and you can actually give it a different file there, right? So PSRule, -dev or something like that, right?
Okay,
and that will give it a different option file. But in terms of the built-in action and pipeline and VS Code, there's no, I guess, way to specifically configure the option file at this stage. But happy to take requests on that one.
Yeah, this actually solves my problem straight away. At the customer's environment right now, they didn't want to use the Azure DevOps extension for security concerns, so we are invoking the PowerShell module directly anyway. So this will be very easy to implement. So
Yeah, awesome.
Glauco,
so-
makes sense that Glauco, that you I know that you are Azure person. I don't know, Sudi, if it's making sense, but what do you think, Glauco?
Yeah, it's for me is a new tool. I never see it before, but everything that Bernie explained makes sense. It's really easy to implement.
That's great. Keep in your mind for your next project.
Yeah.
I have one question, Benny. I think you want to show the pipelines and things, but just to complement that, many people are probably asking that. Is that just like a validation? What happens when you create the resource? How that match with what Tao loves that Azure policies, and have you to do again on Azure policies, and how can you? And you got my question. You have Azure policies, you have PSRule. PSRule is happening before you create the resource. Azure policies keeping the state. How you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely right. With a PSRule, I guess it was always designed to have minimal connectivity, if any, to Azure. And the reason for that is people want to run it in, potentially they have source control systems that are on premises. Maybe they have security concerns about, talking constantly out to Azure, right? So they want to minimize that as much as possible. They want to keep it disconnected as possible. So Azure pretty well was designed so that it doesn't need to have Azure like there. Obviously, the end state is for Azure, but when we're doing our local development, we don't need to have constant connectivity to Azure. We realize, though, people that will want to go ahead and then take the great stuff they've already done with Azure and the cloud adoption framework and Azure landing zones and anything they've built in policy, and they might want to take advantage of that. Today, there's no direct connectivity, but we are absolutely working on that for one of our upcoming releases to basically go ahead and take all the stuff you've built in Azure policy and ideally extract that out to rules that can again still run in that disconnected system, but without you having to write those policies again in PSRule. So that's on the I guess on the future path, but not available today. But that's sort of how we plan to do it. In terms of PSRule as well, originally the PSRule for Azure module really is designed around the well-architected framework. So that's what we sort of align to from a North Star perspective. So we sort of try to look at, how does it connect with a well-architected framework for everything. So things like, like tagging specifically, you can obviously build out for yourself, but it's not included in that base module. But we want to obviously make sure that if you do have an existing investment in Azure policy, which ideally you should already, then you can obviously just take that and apply that locally into VS Code and your CI/CD process for deploying your infrastructure as code. So that's where we're going with that.
That's amazing. Do you like Tao? I think if you can extract from the Azure policy, Tao is going to love it.
Definitely. I was thinking along the same line. Like you have all these 270 rules that can all be translated into policy that you can implement for ongoing compliance, right? For existing resources already been deployed.
Yeah,
and vice versa.
Yeah, you're talking about from here to Azure policy, but Benny was talking about from Azure policy
vice versa,
to here.
Right? Yeah.
If you can do both ways, it'll be even better. You can do it now. It's an open source project.
Yeah, sure. If I can find free time.
You can.
Yeah. So specifically on the roadmap is exporting out of Azure. You know, if there's obviously community interest in going back the other way, then, you know, we may look at that in the future. But I guess in the, you know, medium term, then we're really trying to focus on, you know, if you've already built, and there's already a lot of tools, like you sort of mentioned Terraform before. Obviously, there's the Azure landing zones for Terraform. If you've already used that tool and obviously deployed up to Azure, you probably already have policies, right? Similar if you've used any of the other cloud adoption framework tools, you probably have a bunch of policies that are already there. So instead of having to, you know, rewrite those, obviously to get the benefits of, you know, a shift left type approach within VS Code, then we can actually go ahead and just do that work for you. So that's our goal. And so I guess to sort of show that running in GitHub as well, because I'd be remiss if we didn't actually show that today, but let's go ahead and push that to GitHub. Cool, so let's just go ahead and include all the changes that we've made, including the custom rules and our baseline as well. And now let's go ahead and push that to GitHub. Let's go ahead and publish that branch. And then in a sort of a typical sort of DevOps type approach, we'll go ahead and, you know, with our new branch, go ahead and do a pull request. So, you know, pull and create our pull request. And then, so this is gonna, in this case here, I've already, on my repo, I've gone and set up a required check on my branch. So similar in Azure DevOps, we go ahead and set up a branch policy. It's a similar sort of deal. So basically what this means is that, you know, I can't commit the code until my validation passes, right? And obviously that's how we make sure that when we go ahead and submit changes, we only get the good changes into production, right? And so I guess going back on another point as well, PSRule doesn't necessarily, you know, check or guarantee that then it's absolutely going to deploy within Azure. There could also be some other issues, but more because it's not actually deploying it to Azure, it's going to do its best to emulate that locally. So you may still find there are some errors when you hit deployment time, but we're really trying to minimize that as much as possible, right? As much as possible, common errors to avoid, so that then you basically, when you get to Azure again, you can have an increased chance of success, not only with Azure, but also then with, you know, common policies like, you know, protecting against SSL and things like that, configurations. So that's the idea. And also help you learn how you can actually write the infrastructure's code even better.
Yeah, so like this, I just want to add here that in the pipelines that we're working on right now in the customer's environment, so after I run PSRule checks, I also run the what if validation for the code, and also do a AZ deployment validate command. So do a what if and then do a validation against the ARM engine. So that's checking the code, not in the offline mode, but in the online mode before I actually deploy it. So that just increases your success, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% true. So we'll let that go, but we also want to make sure we obviously. Do you have the link to your blog post? Because again, that's definitely obviously a key thing,
yeah.
a resource
So
that people can.
Yeah, while you sharing the screen, so just blog.tyang.org. Blog.
Oh, oops. Thank you.
.tyang.
There it is.
Yeah, that one. Here we go.
Yeah. So I guess anybody who is looking at checking out PSRule, then they should absolutely go ahead and check out the blog. There's a really good write-up here. So it sort of takes you through the process, and sort of in this, I guess, session, I've sort of explained it in brief and sort of cut a few things, obviously, for the sake of the demo. But in terms of obviously getting started, then definitely check out the blog and give us a vote up, right? Give us some feedback.
Yeah, that's great. And let's put the video there down later when you publish. You can put the video there.
Yeah.
And look, this project is going to grow. How many contributors do you have for the project so far, Benny, on GitHub?
We've got about 5 or 6 contributors. Yeah.
Wow.
That's great. Yeah, I saw people talking about the project already. You guys presented for the internal Microsoft conference a few months ago. And when Tao wrote the blog, I said, yeah, now it's going to get attention. Tao blog is very popular. And thanks, Tao, for writing that. And I was following with Vic. Vic could not make today. He has a trip happening, but Vic Bernada also helping Benny on this, I think, promotion and project on the extension as well. And yeah, nice to see you guys think. I think, what's the feature there, Benny? Someone that you want to get started, look the blog, but also go on GitHub and follow the main contributors, what they should be following.
Yeah. So absolutely check out Tao's blog. That's a good place to get started. In terms of how they can get sort of started, then we'd obviously absolutely appreciate a star on the repo, right? And obviously you can go ahead and watch and fork if you like as well. Feel free to do that. Getting started with the quick start repo as well is a good place to sort of go. So if you want to pretty well go through all the stuff that I just showed, that's pretty well here ready to go. So you can basically go ahead and take a private copy and give that a go for yourself. In terms of if you want to sort of start with some documentation, again, if you go to the repo, and then up in the top right, there's a link to the docs site. You can basically go to the getting started, and there's different steps. Again, like always, we're happy to take feedback on how we can make the documentation even better, but test infrastructure as code and probably customization are probably the areas that I would sort of look at to sort of learn how you can actually go ahead and configure PSRule for your own environment, and then maybe get started with writing your own rules.
And the PowerShell modules are all published in PowerShell Gallery.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So they're all in the PowerShell Gallery, so you can feel free to go ahead and grab that down here. So yeah, there's various different versions. We release, like we're sort of saying, a stable version once a month, but typically there's a few pre-release versions each month as well. Yeah, we've already got one there, and we're going to drop a new one soon. And yeah, it's always something that's ever changing, and it's really great to hear feedback from the community as we go through this process.
That sounds great. And how stable is that? And if someone say, can we trust on this? I see that's inside Microsoft repo.
Yeah. So that's right. It's in the PSRule for Azure is in the Azure organization. Again, it's all open source, so feel free to go ahead and check it out yourself. And you can obviously go ahead and build locally if you're also not 100% sure. There's actually a build.ps1 there as well, so feel free to sort of give it a go. But yes, it's under the Microsoft org from all the source. Yeah.
It's interesting that the customer that I'm working with right now just asked this same question a few weeks ago. So we did manage to show them, like, you go to the actions of this repo, you see all the checks and validations that Microsoft does. And also, I did ask Bernie about code signing, and that's something that they're working on, and will come later as well. So it will be signed, the code.
Yep.
Yeah, if you're watching that and you see something open like I show here, I can see there are 55 there. And it's nice that there's like 160 stars. Maybe next time that we record something will be more, but I'm pretty sure that let's love to record something in the future and with the customers, with some if you're watching these and you are using this, contact us and let's see your experience, your real use case, and let's record that as well. Glauco and Sudi, thanks for any final question. Is something that you think you could use in your company or you could use in the future?
Yes, thank you so much. I didn't have enough experience of this, but was really, really good explained. And thanks, Bernie and Tao, on that. And yeah, it's something I definitely go back on the documentations to have a read and make use of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudi.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Jorge, to invite me for this process. Bernie, Tao, really good explained and really good scenarios that you bring on board. And I don't have much experience as well, but that sure that's something that I can have a look in the future.
I think that's what you want, Bernie.
Yep.
You sold the product. You sold for me at least, but hope for everyone. And thanks everyone for showing. Thanks Bernie for presenting, Tao for everything, for the blog and for ask me to record about that, and we invite Bernie, and it was great. It was really, really great, and I will promote and tell everyone about the project that I haven't told yet. And we'll talk all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.